this process as a global journey, not necessarily just the U.S., but a lot of couples have been outsourcing surrogacy to different countries. And I'm kind of imagining the scenario of creating the embryo using perhaps your own sperm and then an egg donor in the U.S. and then outsourcing the surrogacy process to a different country like Mumbai or stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about that and how, if you have experience in that kind of scenarios?
I think medically, I mean, once you create embryos, the embryos are your legal property, and so they're yours to ship to another program. They're really your property. If you want to, ship them to an IVF program in another country, that's your, right to do that. We take great care in creating those embryos, and so we hate to give them up because we know how to treat them well, and we're nervous about that maybe another program may not have experience in thawing a day 5 embryo as well, but they are your legal property.
And from a psychological perspective, I mean, I'll just reiterate, the screening is key, understanding that the surrogates have been fully informed, and making sure that that's happened. And then again, fast forward. I don't think there's any wrong way to do this, by the way, but fast forward to explaining it to your child. And then, just make sure that you're making choices that you're completely comfortable explaining to your child why you made those particular choices. Trust me, I have a 14 and a 17-year-old. They don't care who the donor was. They don't care about who the actual person was. They definitely want to know how I picked him. They ask me that a lot.
My husband and I did international surrogacy. We did it in India. And as I said before, it offers advantages. Chief of all is cost. But a lot of what Kim was talking about, the screening, and actually a lot of what Robert was talking about also, well, a lot of what everybody was talking about, genetic screening, things like that, we did not have that information. And you don't know as much about the background of your donor as you would here. But for us, we felt like it was the only option that was available to us, and we had actually a very good experience. It's something that I would recommend that you research thoroughly. India, for the time being, is out because of a regulation that was passed by the Ministry of Home Affairs saying that they will not issue exit visas for singles or for same-sex couples. I've talked to the head of the clinic that we worked with there. She says she thinks that it being India, that the right hand isn't talking to the left hand, and that the Ministry of Home Affairs doesn't realize the Supreme Court passed a ruling favorable to surrogacy for gay couples, but that's all to be played out. And so for right now, things are pretty movable on the international landscape. Jeff, why don't you address some of this?
Sure. I think you had a question also about creating the embryos here and shipping them off. We do it all the time. We've worked with Dr. Feynman over at HRC. He's been doing it for us for several years. Up until the ban in India, we were primarily shipping our embryos to India. Now we're doing it to Mexico as well as Thailand. I have a client here actually of mine. His name's Cole. He's one of the last gay couples that are pregnant in India. He's going to be picking up his baby probably in about 3 months? Yes, sir. So I don't know if anybody had any questions for Cole. He's been actually through the whole entire process up until the departure.
What have they told you, actually, as somebody who went through kind of a sweet spot when all the corruption had been worked out, but they hadn't passed the regulation yet? What have they told you as far as being in the middle of the process and getting the babies out, or baby? Twins or singleton? Or?
It's a singleton. My baby was conceived 2 weeks before the ban was stated, so it was
December? Yeah,
it was December. But it was really great that we've been able to work with the Indian government. Rudy and Jeff here have an attorney over in India in Mumbai, and they've actually been able to get us humanitarian relief that the Indian government has issued. So it's pretty much taken care of in our case. Also, the surrogacy contract's in place. Everything's ready to go. You know, there are some bumps in the road, but you know, Planet Hospital really helped us out.
One of the things I would say is, you know, again, you heard Kim say it's a roller coaster ride. If it's a roller coaster ride here, multiply that, you know, times 10 for international surrogacy. We had a great experience. Well, I mean, if you could still do it in India, I would recommend, if you were interested in doing it, if you felt like that was the only option open to you, that you go ahead with it. But again, I wouldn't do it unless you have a strong constitution and, like Kim said, a high trust level.
And it's important for the receiving end, like Dr. Ringler said, to know how to work with your embryos. You would be surprised, even in the United States, how different it is if an embryo is frozen in Los Angeles. I had a case of a couple whose surrogate would not leave because she's a teacher, and they're in the Southeast. So the donor was here, the surrogate's there, they flew, and we created the embryos here. And it's been months in the process making sure that we've sent the proper thaw protocols and practice straws, because they just don't use that vitrification or that freezing system. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Some are better than others. So actually the freezing of the embryos is the easy part. The art of it and the success of it comes from the thaw. And this is why we are always reluctant to let our embryos go to other centers. So if you have a good working relationship with the receiving center and they're used to getting embryos from the way you cryopreserve, and the labs are communicating with each other, I think it's very, very doable.
We work with a fair number of people who have had experience in especially India. And the one comment that I would like to make is that there's nothing more expensive than a failed surrogacy. And when you consider some of the success rates of the IVF process, when you consider some of the other problems, including those that have been discussed here with India, the Ukraine, and other places, the risks are huge and should be considered along with the cost issues.
We have a panelist on the panel later of personal stories who can talk a little bit about failed attempts in India and so forth. Any other questions?
As a potential single father, I also have a particular legal situation where I'm living here under a green card as a Canadian. Are there things that I should be aware of that could be particular stumbling blocks for myself? And I address that to all of you.
So you're intending on doing a surrogacy here in the United States?
Possibly, yes. But I'd consider other options as well.
I think you'll find that there are very few problems with doing a surrogacy here in the United States. You'd be able to, you'd fall into a large category. Probably half of our clients are international gay families. And they're living in the foreign country. They're living in Israel. They're living in France. Being here, I think, would be quite easy for you to do. I don't think that there'd be any special problems. We've worked with Canada for years and years doing adoptions and surrogacies back and forth, and a part of that establishing parentage. That's something you should talk to somebody about on the one hand a little bit at greater length, but I don't think you're going to find that to be in any way significant.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but your babies would be born with dual citizenship, correct? Because they would be born in the
With
United
American
States.
citizenship.
They'd be born with a U.S. citizen.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they'd have Canadian citizenship because they were born to a Canadian citizen, correct?
You'll have to
It
seek
depends
that.
on the country. I don't know what the policies are in Canada, but every country has a different way of you establishing the parental rights in your own country. So some by descent, some by application, but it shouldn't be complicated. The birth certificate will be a U.S. birth certificate with your name on it. So the child potentially just has one parent? Depends what state your child is born in. So every state has a different way of doing it. Most of us, I would assume most of us only work in states, or we would match you with a surrogate who lives in a state where only you would be on the birth certificate. But there are some states in the U.S. where if you were matched with that surrogate, her name would be on the birth certificate too, which is why you would want to make sure from the beginning you're set up in a way that's going to work for you if that's not what you want, and most people don't want that.
But Don, correct me if I'm wrong, they can then go back to California where they live and get an amended birth certificate eventually, or just
Assuming
with-
that that's where the baby is born, yes.
Where where
No.
the baby's born.
No, I'm saying even if they can't, I think there's only 1 or 2 states that want to amend the birth certificate, but at the very least they can get the surrogate's rights terminated and be, for all intents and purposes, the sole parent.
That would be the same experience as it would for anybody else.
Yeah.
And I do believe that there are significantly more than just a couple of states that will refuse to amend the birth certificates. That's a popular thing these days.
Let me just say that we have quite a few people, at least in New York, that have been asking questions about citizenship and status. Obviously, once you're a resident here, and even on a regular work permit, even if you're not a resident, you're not going to have any problems going through the process. As long as you finish the process while you're still here legally, even as a student for that matter. The issue is if you are intending to also get parentage rights and citizenship for the child in another country. So that is when you should definitely consult with a lawyer and with an agency that also helps people from that destination country to become parents.
And you want to do that before you're matched, not
Exactly.
after you're matched and once you're pregnant. Because, for example, if you live in the UK, they require the surrogate's name is left on the birth certificate when you go back to the UK. It's the only way you can manage it legally there. And if you don't know that and you're matched with a married surrogate, her husband is going to be the one who's on the birth certificate, not you. So every single jurisdiction has a different rule, but once you're matched and you have a contract, it's too late to change those things without dissolving the match completely. So you want to get all of that done up front.
What do people want to keep in mind as they are selecting a surrogate as far as the geographical location is concerned? One of the things I'm thinking about is California and the pre-birth order that you can get. Could you guys go into that a little bit, whoever wants to address it?
Well, there really are sort of 3 considerations for where your surrogate lives. One is the legal status, and you want to make sure you're really clear about that, because the law that's going to dictate is where the baby's born, not where you live. And then secondly, there's some extra expense if your surrogate lives far away, and every time you bring her to wherever your clinic is or anytime you go to see her. And then thirdly is what you want your relationship to be like. If you want to go to every OB appointment, then you better live in the same town or nearby where your surrogate lives. So those would be the things to consider.
Jason, we have a question
My
here.
clients are especially interested in having both parents on the birth certificate. It's absolutely fundamental to what they're looking for in their sense of family. If you go to, obviously you can do that in California, you can do it in Oregon, you can do it in many states, but there are some that just flat won't work with this. And I could talk about, won't get into the appellate court cases that have gone down on this issue. Most recently, there's been a case where, in Texas, where on the one hand, the federal courts have ordered them to honor, give effect to a judgment where 2 men were established as the legal parents of a child from another state, and they said, fine, we'll go ahead and we'll give full faith and credit to that on the one hand, but we won't change the birth certificate on the other. And so it's a really in-your-face circumstance, and it is one of those things that's easy to avoid. Just make sure that you think about it prior to the time of the match for obvious reasons.
Can you explain really briefly? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Let's take the question.
Another citizenship question, but it's almost exactly the opposite of this fellow's. I have only an American citizenship. I'm a single intending to do a Kelsey Grammer type birth where I'm not related to the male gamete or the female gamete or the surrogate. And I desire to have my child receive a citizenship in a jus sanguinis country like Switzerland. can you advise me how to proceed? Because we're hoping that the surrogate's not going to be on the birth certificate, but we do hope to receive the benefit of her passing her citizenship.
Well, what I don't think you're going to be, first, I can't tell you about that, and the reason is that that you need to go to Switzerland and ask specifically the people there what it would be to establish citizenship. What I can tell you is that you can establish citizenship and obviously your parentage relationship with the child in many states in the United States.
No, I get that U.S. citizenship is easy because we're a Jews. What's the word for being born here gives you citizenship.
Right.
But in these other countries where citizenship is tremendously difficult, like it would take me 25 years to be naturalized in Andorra, but if he were born of an Andorran parent, he would receive that automatically. So how can I ensure that both he receives the benefit of that citizenship, but that also the surrogate is not a claimant to parenthood?
Where are you thinking your surrogate's going to be?
I think the question is, could he possibly work with an American surrogate, or egg donor for that matter, that has either heritage claims or some dual citizenship that would allow that could be passed to the child without committing any legal rights to the surrogate
I
or
would
the egg
say be careful about, I don't think we can have it both ways.
No.
And I think that we see this, there's a case where, you know, a lesbian couple splits up and the non-bio parent is sort of excluded, and the bio parent's argument is that they're not the real parent. I mean, I don't think we can have it both ways. If we want to be that we're the legal parents, I don't think that we can be looking at that. And I don't know that you want to have a legal. It's sort of a catch-22 because you're asking for a legal document that the surrogate or donor is passing. It has a connection. I mean, what's really important here, again, in terms of telling your story and creating your story, is understanding who all the parts are and what their function is. So the surrogate is not the mother, she's the carrier. The donor is not the mother, she's the genetic contributor, like that. And I think when we cross a line and we try to have it both ways, it's a dangerous, kind of a slippery slope. And I don't think you'd have a legal ground, but as he said, every country is different, not just every state in the U.S.
We also always advise you to speak to an attorney in that specific country.
Exactly.
If you want citizenship in a separate country, seek legal advice before you start the process, so you're fully aware of what steps you need to do to get citizenship in that specific country.
For instance, in Italy, even if you were to do everything correctly here, I know that at some point, an Italian egg donor, for instance, could claim that she's the parent.
That's right.
But you would want to really avoid that. So I guess this is a balancing act that I think most of us are getting nervous about. One more question?
And one last thing, don't assume that if the embryos are created here in the U.S., that you can get them into the country that you want. That's very important.
Actually, out of curiosity, is there a country in particular that you're thinking of?
Actually, Andorra.
Why Andorra?
I think we can take that off. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, we do. Saeed, you had a comment?
John, has there been any, actually, to follow up on that, there was a case where the surrogate actually had her pregnancy delivered in Israel, and the United States government denied citizenship, but both parents were of United States origin. So I think there was a case sort of the opposite of that. But I had a quick question for you, and is, have you found some difficulties in terms of hospitals accepting surrogates because of potential complications afterwards with babies, in terms of wanting significant amounts of money beforehand?
It's interesting because I heard about that for the first time when I was down in San Diego last week at a conference. No, my answer is no. I have never seen a circumstance where one of the hospitals that we were working with, and by that I mean mostly either in my law practice or with Northwest Surrogacy Center, where there was where the hospital has declined to provide services. It simply has never happened in in our experience, nor have we heard about other people experiencing that in the Northwest. I do know that there are some people outside the Northwest that have been complaining about hospitals saying no, and it's something that's particularly coming up in the context of the Affordable Health Care Act, where there's concerns that even though insurance companies might be willing to pay, that the hospitals will deny entrance. So,
Thank you.